Welcome to Muswell Hill Baptist Church as we celebrate harvest. Genesis chapter 8 verse 22 reads, "While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease."
Let's say this together and aloud. Praise awaits you, O God in Zion. To you our vows will be fulfilled. O you who hear prayer, to you all men will come. When we were overwhelmed by sins, you forgave our transgressions. Blessed are those you choose and bring near to live in your courts. We are filled with the good things of your house, of your holy temple. You answer us with awesome deeds of righteousness, O God our Saviour, the hope of all the ends of the earth, and of the farthest seas, who formed the mountains by your power, having armed yourself with strength, who stilled the roaring of the seas, the roaring of their waves, and the turmoil of the nations. Those living far away fear your wonders. Where morning dawns and evening fades, you call forth songs of joy. You care for the land and water it. You enrich it abundantly. The streams of God are filled with water to provide the people with rain, and so you have ordained it. You dredge its furrows and level its ridges. You soften it with showers and bless its crops. You crown the year with your bounty, and your carts overflow with abundance. The grasslands of the desert overflow. The hills are clothed with gladness. The meadows are covered with flocks, and the valleys are mantled with grain. They shout for joy and sing. Amen.
Genesis 8 verse 20. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord and took some of every clean animal and some of every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And when the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma, the Lord said in his heart, "I will never again curse the ground because of man. For the intention of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I ever again strike down every living creature as I have done. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease." Everyone realizes that COVID-19 has knocked a lot of things down, but to try to be positive about it, let's build back better. And so there was a great flood, and the earth was covered. And in Genesis 8, at the end of the chapter, we have come to the build back phase. Now, building back at all, it should be said, is a very God thing to do. In fact, it's a pattern that God in time has repeated often. He built back Israel, who went away from him and who were sent into exile. God built back Israel. He didn't dispense with them and start with a different group of people. He built them back. When the apostles, as we've come to know them as, all fled at the cross, how much more sensible it would seem of God to give up on those 11/12 and to start with a completely different group of people who Jesus gets to know after his resurrection. But no, when Jesus rises from the dead, he builds back. He literally builds back into Peter's life, a restoration. You can read about it in John chapter 21. And the whole Jesus thing, which is at the center of why we're here this morning and what this church is about building back. Why did God not wipe out the world and start on some other planet, or even on this planet with some other bunch of humanoids all over again? But instead, he came as a human and lived among us. And the Bible describes Jesus in many ways, one of which is the last Adam. So having had Adam to start the human race, he then brings in himself a human being who starts the human race afresh. We can be born again. That's God building back. It's what he does, and it's what he did with Noah and with the world in Noah's time. The food that we get from the earth comes from what was once the ocean floor. So there's a building back. But the question is, will the world build back better? And here the answer, it seems, is yes and no. Yes, it will be built back better by God. His new promise that Genesis 8, chapter 22 represents is a promise that didn't exist in quite the same way before. God guarantees seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night. He'd already made them, but now he offers a guarantee for the rest of the existence of the earth while the earth remains. He will never wipe out things with a great worldwide flood anymore. So God's promise is that he will build back better. But that's not quite the same for human beings. God's perspective on human beings is found in the previous verse, Genesis 8, verse 21. A verse that, for rather obvious reasons, is often not read when verse 22 is read out at a harvest. For prior to his promise, this is what God says, reflecting on what has happened in the flood. The Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground because of man, for the intention of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I ever again strike down every living creature as I have done. Perhaps you could summarize God as saying, well, if I wait for human beings to behave as they should, I will be sending floods all the time. And therefore, God makes this great promise in spite of human beings. Now, we have a better opinion of human beings than God has, because, of course, we are part of the problem. When we see sin, we don't see its full hurt. When we see rebellion against God, we ourselves are part of the rebellion. If we drive along the road at 40 miles an hour in a 30 limit, we tend not to notice the vehicles that are going along at 35 to 40 miles an hour. It doesn't seem so bad when we're part of the problem. God, however, sees that human beings are bent towards sin and makes his promise anyway. They are not going to build back better. And many of the sins that are found in the opening chapters of Genesis are still alive and well today. But God builds back with his promises. So is that it then? That's where harvest belongs. God gives us the harvest year by year. He promises and he gives it. Human beings still love their sin, and they seem to love it more and more, but they still get the harvest, the seed time and harvest, the summer and winter, the day and night. And is that going to just go on and on forever? Well, no. The promise that God gave after the flood was a contingent promise. While the earth remains. Sin cannot go on forever. And so it is that God promises that there will be a new heaven and a new earth, an order of things where sin is done away with. The harvest and the seed time that we enjoy is part of God's incredible kindness and grace. So we don't just thank him for the food and for the products and for the beauty of the earth. We thank him for the beauty of his grace and love, which we do not deserve, but which we receive. And we look forward to the day when we have all the gracious gifts and we do not contribute the sin that is greedy, that makes the world a less beautiful place than it would be.
Bless the Lord.